Welcome to the Sharkpreneur podcast with Kevin Harrington and Seth Greene. Kevin Harrington is the inventor of the infomercial, one of the original sharks from the hit TV show Shark Tank, and has generated over $5 billion in TV and digital direct response sales. Seth Greene is the world's first trusted authority on cutting-edge direct response marketing, a best-selling author, and the only 3-time Marketer of the Year nominee. On the podcast, Kevin and Seth interview sharkpreneurs who share straight talk on what it takes to explode your business.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com. Welcome to the podcast. This is your co-host, Seth Greene. Today, I've got the good fortune to be interviewing JB, Jonathan Brown from White Buffalo Advisors. As president of White Buffalo, JB is an accomplished broker, investor, and M&A expert with over $100 million in business transactions under his belt. With 20 plus years of experience, he has significantly increased the bottom lines for over 1,000 clients across more than 100 industries worldwide. JB, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Seth. It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. So let's go back in time just a little bit. How did you get started?
Yeah, so this was sort of a happy accident. I'm a little bit of a, sort of the Forrest Gump of business, as it were. So I was working in corporate decades ago at this point and started off in sales and enjoyed that and worked my way up the sales ladder, as a lot of folks do, and accidentally found myself moving into non-sales roles that really could be best described as, this sort of a mercenary type situation, a fixer, where, the company, big, gigantic companies would have an expensive problem that didn't meet traditional parameters in terms of how you might define the problem with a customer or internal. And they would just sort of get me on a plane and send me out there to figure out what is it that's happening here and why is this a problem, and solve it. And so sort of the Rambo thing came in, where you'd sort of drop me behind enemy lines, I'd get it done, and then I'd get the heck out of there. Well, you do that for long enough, and what you realize, Seth, is that some people are born entrepreneurial. And I didn't have that verbiage back then to understand that that's what I was. But really, I was a born and bred entrepreneur, problem solver, who just happened to be operating in a corporate environment. And when you come to that realization, generally one of two things happen. Either you sort of accept that that's what it's going to be and you move forward, or a lot of us, we get to a point where we realize the very things that make us attractive to a corporation, our outside the box thinking, our lack of regard for rules and process, if they don't serve the end goal, they can start to irritate the companies that we work for. They can start to resent it. And the other thing that happens is you realize that your contribution is making the company you work for a lot of money. And the proportion of that money that you end up getting in your bank account via payroll is not reflective of what you bring to the table. And so you can either complain about it, or you can do something else. I decided to do something else. So I started a business, built that sucker up, sold it, did it again and again. And then throughout the process of learning all there is about what goes into exiting a business, what has to be true in order for a business exit to be the best that it can be, made a lot of notes, made a lot of mistakes, and started having folks ask me who just were friends if I would help them. And for a long time said no, because I never woke up one morning and thought to myself, I'm going to become an M&A advisor. I couldn't even have told you what that was. But eventually the right person asked, and it was sort of one of those golf lunch conversations where he just kept taking these phone calls, and his frustration level was increasing with every phone call. And I knew he had a great business, and I knew that he'd been talking about an exit to an interested party, and, sort of looking over his shoulder at the emails he was getting and what was being seen. And I finally was like, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. Ask him this, tell him this. And he finally said, do you want to just help me with this? I could really use it. And I did. And so that was my first, this is more than 10 years ago now, but that was my first unpaid, although he did pay for the round of golf, so I guess it wasn't unpaid. That was my first unpaid foray into helping folks sort of conceptualize what has to happen in order for a great exit. And so from there, very organically, just started growing. And I should mention this entire time, even going back to my corporate years, I'd been an executive coach forever. And so the types of situations that you run into leadership wise are often very similar. And there's a lot of carryover to the types of issues that you have to deal with in preparing somebody for an exit. So, lo and behold, here we are, more than a decade later, and sort of found the one area that I really enjoy. I enjoy helping folks through what is often one of the more stressful things that happen in the life of an entrepreneur in a fairly predictable way.
Awesome. So talk a little bit about the evolution of the business now.
M&A or my business?
Your business.
Yeah. So starting off, I really ran what would be considered a very traditional brokerage model, right? And so brokerage by its definition is it's very transactional in nature. So a person decides for any number of reasons that I am ready to sell or exit my business that I've either bought and built up over time, or I founded it and have built it up, and I want out. And so when you come in as a broker, generally what you're doing is very passive, and that you're simply aggregating and gathering all of the information that they have available. You're trying to sift through it, and you're trying to package it up in the best way that you can to present an accurate picture of whatever the business is and what the opportunity is for someone that might purchase it. And after doing that for a little while, what consistently would happen is that I would see a lot of meat on the bone during exits, where by the time somebody would reach out to me and they wanted to sell their business, they were either partially mentally checked out, frazzled, exhausted, you name it, and they had already made the decision to move on. And so meaningful incremental improvements in the business were either not happening anymore, or they were not happening in the right way. And by the time they came to me, it really was sort of just get me the very best that you can for the business. And that got frustrating to me over time, because I really hate seeing unmaximized opportunities. And so I remember thinking to myself, Seth, gosh, if I could get to these folks a year, maybe even 2 years, depending on the nature of the business, earlier, I could help them to put systems and processes into place that would very significantly increase both the financial component of their exit, but in the interim between when they actually spoke to me the first time and when they exited, I could create a situation for them where they may decide they didn't need to exit the business at all, because you remove, a lot of the day-to-day just stresses and key man's prison, I call it, where they've put themselves, no matter how highly paid they are, no matter how successful, no matter how outwardly someone might look at them and say, gosh, must be nice. Those are things that we hear a lot from, successful entrepreneurs. Must be nice, or, I'm not that lucky. Well, the reality is what you don't see in that person is, yeah, they wake up in the morning, they go run a great business, they put out all the fires, and it's a lonely endeavor, because they don't have anyone to talk to about how hard it really is. And there are days when they wake up, and I know this because I've done it, I'm sure you have, where you wake up despite your success and you think to yourself, I wonder if I would just walk out into the middle of traffic and hope a truck hits me, because I seemingly have everything that you would want. And yet I feel internally like my life is not my own, and I'm constantly full of stress. So if you can, I call that the first exit. If you can, really, we use a double exit process. The second exit is what you think of. It's exactly what you would think, exiting someone from a business and selling that asset to somebody else. In order for that exit to be maximized, what has to happen first is the hidden exit. That's the first exit, which is really exiting the entrepreneur founder from being relevant at all to the business. And that serves both the purpose of improving the quality of life of the founder. The other thing that it does is you've done the work that you're going to get dinged on through the acquisition process and all the due diligence that happens, especially with a sophisticated buyer. They're going to have less things to throw back at you to decrease the price that they're willing to pay you, because you can say, oh yeah, man, that's a great idea. I've already done that. Yeah, we already have this. Oh, you want to see that? It's right here. No problem. So the dual exit process is something that I just sort of trial and errored my way into that seems to work really well.
Awesome. So let's talk about, you've learned so much, because not only did you do it yourself multiple times, but you've now done it over 1,000 times in 100 different industries. What are some of the biggest mistakes we as business owners make when, one, getting ourselves out of the day-to-day, and then two, actually selling?
Yeah. So number one, it's really about mindset. So what it takes to, let's say you're starting from nothing. Okay. And a lot of folks will relate to this. And and if you're way ahead of this, you can remember back to when you did start with nothing. You start with nothing, and there are certain skill sets and behaviors and attitudes that you have to have in order to get from, let's say, zero to, 5, maybe $10 million in revenue. And a lot of those, you can run a really lean team. Sometimes it's just you and a few people, maybe some vendors, but you're still performing a lot of the day-to-day tasks, and you're definitely performing most of the very meaningful tasks. Well, what ends up happening is when you grow past a certain level, there does come a point where the continued success of the business that you're running can no longer be dependent upon you. It has to get to a point where instead of being the doer of the thing at a high level, what you really become is someone who can lead other people doing the thing very well. And that's a mindset shift first. That's difficult for some people to work through, but it's also an entirely different set of skills. Entirely different set of skills. So being able to quantify what great looks like within your business and different pieces of it, and then to systematize that and be able to lead someone else who's doing that well in a replicatable way without it constantly dragging you back in. It's a very steep learning curve, and it's one that a lot of people sort of miss the importance of. Another I would say is really folks underestimate, and this is very cliche, but cliches are true. Folks tend to underestimate what they can really accomplish in a 5-year span, but they overestimate what they can get done in a month. And so, really having kind of trying to avoid this up and down sort of seesaw. If you plotted it graphically, it looks an awful lot like an echocardiogram, where I'm a genius, I'm an idiot, our business is amazing, we're doing great, we're terrible, and trying to live as best you can in the middle, and not getting lost in becoming a slave to the urgent. Just knowing, okay, what are the realistically any given day as a leader for me and for folks I work with, there's usually one or two things. Same is true of a week, same is true of a month. There's usually one or two things that if you execute them at an incredibly high level, all of the other things that were underneath that in the list really just aren't as important and are not that big of a deal. So understanding how to prioritize within the framework of what your skill set is crucially important.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what about, let's say we've gotten out of our own way, we've got systems in place, we've got people running the systems, and then it comes time to actually exit. I'm sure you've seen some crazy mistakes, horror stories, things going wrong, and on the upside, things going really right. Give us a couple takeaways, a couple lessons from some of your multiple decades of experience.
Yeah. So a big one is understanding who it is that is likely to buy your business, because depending upon the industry that your business is in and the nature of your business, you're going to have different types of buyers. So if you're 5 million and under in revenue, regardless really of what your EBITDA is or seller's discretionary earnings, usually at that size, they're kind of the same, but not exactly. You're probably going to be dealing with an individual buyer, or maybe even a competitor who wants to snap you up. That's generally is a less involved exit process than if you're any larger than that, or you're exiting to what I would call a sophisticated buyer. And that could be anything from private equity would be the most obvious to also more of a strategic. The important thing to remember with those is you have to know what the model is of the person or entity that's buying you. What is it that they're looking to get out of it? And so if you understand that, there are some things that you don't want to do, and there are some things that you do want to do. So I'll give you a specific example. If you're in e-commerce, for example, e-commerce multiples in general right now are somewhat depressed. And so I had a client who was exiting to a private equity, and they had the right intentions. Their heart was in the right place. And this was probably about a year-long process from the very beginning of when some initial interest is expressed to when the deal actually closed. So the other thing I would say is you have to be a little bit patient. But in the due diligence process, what happened was the thing that private equity is going to look at more than anything is profitability and revenue trends. And so what the seller thought was, okay, we're in the middle of the process. If I can boost revenue significantly, I may be able to get them to offer me more throughout this process. Well, the only way that they could do that because of their model was to drastically increase ad spend and ad headcount. Well, what happens when you increase ad spend and ad headcount, especially with ad spend in the current era, if it's uncontrolled, is your profitability is going to go down significantly. And once profitability gets below a certain benchmark, and every single acquirer is going to be different, you're no longer a target for them at all, because it's a red flag that, okay, wait a minute, are these numbers that you showed us in the beginning not realistic and not representative of what the business truly is? So that nearly killed the deal. Other thing that I think is really important, and if folks don't get anything else out of this other than the following, it's worth it. Every single industry has a multiple range, an exit multiple range. It's generally almost always a multiple of EBITDA. There's a few industries that are different, but for the most part, you're going to see, anywhere from 1 to 10 or more times your EBITDA is what you can expect to receive at exit. Well, financial, for example, is 7 to 12 right now. IT and digital, 6 to 14. Professional services, 5 to 12. Here's the important point. You have no control over what that multiple range is. None. There's nothing whatsoever that you can do to impact that range. You do have significant control and autonomy over where your business falls in that exit range. Because let's say you're in financial services of some type. Well, do you want to sell it at 7 or do you want to sell it at 12? Of course, you would rather sell it at 12. What we're doing is we're looking at the difference between a company that exits at a 7 and a 12, and we're simply reverse engineering what had to be true in order for them to come in at the higher end of that range. So that's a really important thing to understand, is how you stack up to a potential competitor who, the same acquirer could be looking at and saying, all right, I've got company A here, which is yours, and I've got company B here, and you're going to be compared. So you want to do that work beforehand and understand, if you put yourself in the other chair and you were the one buying your business, what would you think? What's the story that you would tell yourself? What are the things that you would be concerned about, and how would you compare yourself to a potential competitor? So understanding the multiple ranges in your industry and knowing that you can manipulate where you fall in that range is something that a lot of folks don't spend enough time thinking about.
That makes a lot of sense. Your passion is obvious. What do you like best about what you're doing?
Oh man, it's going to be surprising. It's not the money. You get to a point, and a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm so blessed to have such a great network of unbelievable folks who have achieved great things. And you start to notice trends. When you get to a certain level, it's no longer about the money anymore. That's not enough to get you up in the morning and to get you going. For me, what it's about is making meaningful difference in folks' lives who are high achievers. But if we're all honest, being a high achiever can be lonely as hell, because you feel often misunderstood. You may have lost friends and acquaintances throughout the process of becoming the thing that you had to become in order to have the life that you have and to build the thing that you built. It's a really lonely thing. And so just being able to be that person that understands and that they can have those conversations with. And then also, there's an old truism that you show me a lawyer that represents himself, and I'll show you a lawyer that has a fool for a client. And I don't represent myself in exits anymore. And the reason for that is, no matter how good you are, no matter how smart you are, when it's you get too close, and there are things that you miss, and there are assumptions that you make. And sometimes there's arrogance in us and assumptions that we make in thinking, no, this is definitely great. And then a buyer looks at it and says, that's terrible. I don't want that. And then you get offended, and then the deal falls apart. So being able to navigate folks through really what is more of an emotional exercise than a financial one when it comes to an exit. And then the other thing that's been a huge personal source of satisfaction for me recently is that almost every entrepreneur that I know who makes an exit, within a month or two, experiences what I can only describe as entrepreneurial depression. And it's very real. And if you have not experienced it, some of the folks that may hear this are going to know right away what I'm talking about. But if you haven't experienced it, you spent all this time, no matter how hard it was, no matter how stressful it was, no matter how many steps you had to take, and just absolute soul searching, gut check things that you had to do in order to become successful. You think you're going to want out, and you think your life is going to be amazing once you get a gigantic check and your bank account is flush. And in many cases, you don't have to ever work again. And then cutover day happens. And cutover day is simply when you everything's funded, the business transitions from you to someone else, and you are no longer needed. usually folks will find something to do for a few weeks, the things that they had been putting off. Maybe you take up golf, you go fishing, you go on vacations, you buy a fancy car, whatever that is. Well, inevitably, there will come a time when you start to, for reasons that you can't explain, feel down, off, purposeless. And so I spend a lot of time throughout the exit prep process preparing people for the emotional side of what's probably going to happen, including as specifically as I can a 90-day plan of, okay, if I gave you a $20 million check tomorrow, what are you going to buy specifically? And I get as specific as I can, because what I'm trying to understand is, how is this person wired and motivated? And to the best of my ability, how can I avoid them getting into that scenario where you sell a business, you get that entrepreneurial depression, you have a little bit of an existential crisis, and then you go and make a really bad decision. And sometimes they'll go and they'll start something else, or they'll buy something else just to have something to do and to feel that sort of energy jolt that you get from being an entrepreneur. And often those first purchases, decisions, whether they're a personal thing that you bought or a business that you involved yourself in, are really bad decisions, because they weren't made on good business principles and logic. They were made because this is a new feeling and I don't like it, and I want to try to get away from this feeling. So I find that sort of thing to be just as meaningful as getting folks the most money that they can.
That is beautiful. Well, we know your time is incredibly valuable. We greatly appreciate you spending some of it with us. For our folks who are watching and listening and want to learn more about all things JB, where should we send them?
You can find me at whitebuffaloadvisors.com. You can shoot an email and I'll get it. You can also, I'm pretty active on social, so you can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, and I'm pretty accessible. So you can DM me. If you find my number, you're welcome to text me, but good luck finding my number.
All right. Well, this has been Seth Greene with Jonathan Brown from whitebuffaloadvisors.com. Thank you, everybody, for watching or listening. We will talk to you or see you next time.
Why do so many businesses struggle while others seem to explode overnight? Do you wish you had the secret to this type of exponential growth? Now, I've scaled more than 20 businesses to over $100 million, and it's not just luck. In my new book with Mark Tim, Mentor to Millions, you'll learn the repeatable framework I use in all my business ventures for massive success. Order at kevinmentor.com and get over $1,000 in bonuses. Head to kevinmentor.com.